Susan Matthews is Honorary Senior Research Fellow. Is this on? Susan's Honorary Senior Research Fellow in English and Creative Writing at the University of Roehampton. She's published widely on the histories of sex, sexuality and gender. Her research interests include children's literature and narrative theory. Her current research interests include 20th century narratives of sex change.
Okay, so I think the question I'm asking us to think about in this session is, why is it that the absolutely extraordinary beliefs that we've been told about during this day so far seem natural and normal to so many people? Why aren't they more shocking? So I'm going to be looking at some, in a sense, sort of soft cultural material. I'm going to be looking at books produced for children. So we could think of this as story time. We all sit back, we enjoy ourselves, it's after lunch, but you mustn't go to sleep because halfway through there will be a test. Okay, so I'm going to begin with a true story. I'm going to begin by describing two 4-year-old children. Child A, we're going to call him Arthur, was 4 in the mid-1990s. Child B, that's Billy, was 4 in 2018. In fact, they're both real children. I know them. But I could just as well have invented them, because they're so perfect as examples. So Arthur was 4 in 1995. He's the youngest of 3 children, with 2 rather flamboyant older sisters. By the age of 4, it's striking that Arthur loves dressing up, especially wearing his older sister's pink tutu and sparkly shoes. No one makes a big deal about this. I mean, you know, they're liberal, it's a liberal arty family. He's not taken to the doctor or a gender specialist. In fact, no one really in liberal arty circles has heard about a doctor or gender specialist for little boys who like tutus in the 1990s. There's some discussion about whether Arthur should go to nursery in a tutu. In the end, the mother simply chooses him androgynous clothes in the brightest, pinkest, most flowery colours she can find. And they go on like this very happily until one day, when Arthur is 11, his mother comes home with a flowery sweatshirt and Arthur says, "I don't want this, I want a navy blue one." Now, I checked back in with the mother recently, and we know how Arthur has turned out. Aged 18, he's a markedly feminine boy. He's happy exploring his identity and his sexuality. He may well be gay, but I think that's his business. Billy, who was 4 last year, is a child of the 21st century. He loves pink shiny backpacks and wears a rainbow skirt and lycra leggings. His mother is a really good mother, and she knows that she has a trans kid, and she's educated Granny and the nursery about the need to affirm his identity as a girl. She's bought him every trans kid book available, and there are lots. She particularly likes, next slide, Who Are You? The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity by Brooke Pessin-Wedby. This is, quote, an introduction to gender for ages 3+, published by Jessica Kingsley, London and Philadelphia. A product of a distinctively US affirmative model of gender, this is the kind of bright, attractive book a parent might select. It contains simple affirmations like, the important thing to remember is that you are the one who knows you best. And I don't think any of us will disagree with that. The book helps Billy to distinguish between sex, quote, assigned at birth, and gender, which is defined as your personal expression, what you like, how you dress and act. But of course, Arthur managed this perfectly well without a book. Billy, aged 4, learns that people say there are only 2 genders, but there are really many genders. He's learned that the word cisgender, this is in the book for 3+, means when someone's identity matches their sex assigned at birth, and this phrase trips easily off Billy's tongue at nursery. He's also learned the names of some of the genders he could choose. Trans, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, transgender, gender neutral, agender, neutrois, a good word for a 3-year-old, bigender, third gender, or two-spirit. Billy's granny has been educated in gender. She's a bit worried that the mother is already discussing possible later medical interventions, but she's talked to a therapist friend who explained that puberty blockers may well help when Johnny is older. Oh, I changed the name. It's Billy. She knows, and it's not Johnny in real life either. She knows that blockers provide, quote, a breathing space and, quote, a pause button that help a child to decide whether to go ahead with cross-sex hormones when the time comes. So I think, there's absolutely no doubt that there's been a change in how we respond. I don't mean, I mean we collectively as a whole sort of society or something, to kids who display cross-gender identification and who are gender non-conforming in the last 20 years. And what I think we've produced is a culture which is obsessed with gender. We can see this obsession reinforced in the plethora of new materials online and in printed form, as well as those prepared specifically for use in schools, which teach gender identity ideology to professionals, to parents and to children. Next slide. Oh, actually, a little pause, we're just going to see a little more of this book. And we have another slide. Yes. So this is from, this is a note for the grown-ups, and I think one of the points I want to make is that these books for little children are really to educate the parents. So it's giving the parent a framework to interpret their child. Next. Of course, it teaches you about assigning gender at birth. Babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies. On we go.
Next one?
Yes, and I'll be testing you on this later. Gender is much more than the body you were born with. Sometimes people get this confused with, yes, this is the sex assigned to you at birth, pink and blue, male or female. Sometimes people get this confused with gender, but gender is much more than the body you were born with. Yes, on? Okay, this is where I want to get to next. So I suppose this is my most sort of flagrant and outrageous example. It comes from the internet. Supposing you had your little boy who wears a tutu and you Google, you might come up with WikiHow, talking to a child you believe may be trans. Yeah, I don't think I need your you can see what's going on there. You believe may be trans. So what do you do? Next slide. You give them opportunities. You do not need to sit down and embark on a long lecture. Let them experiment and find out how they feel. They may open up to you all on their own. Leave around a few books with transgender characters. Hint, on we go. But if that doesn't work, they haven't taken the hint. If they seem like they want to come out, but are too shy, it's time to initiate the conversation. Sit them down one day and gently begin. Remind them of one of the transgender books and ask if they've ever felt that way. Make it clear that it's okay either way. Actually, I wonder whether it is, this is the second try. And that you love and accept them. Remember Sophie from the library book? I've noticed that you like long hair and feminine things. Have you ever felt that you were actually a girl instead of a boy? Yeah, good, you've got it. All right, okay. Now, obviously, that's the sort of most, if these materials, everything is on a spectrum, as we know, and if this is a spectrum of ridiculous books, that's my most ridiculous material. But I think the question I want to ask you sort of at the end is the most sophisticated book, in a sense, actually part of the same world belief, the same ideology? We'll get to my sophisticated one at the end. So there are lots and lots of these books. Here's a new one from June 2019. It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity. And in my chapter about gender identity workbooks, it seems as if they start off with Kate Bornstein in 1998, but it's exactly when, if you remember that graph, when it goes zooming up, 2012, that publishers start saying, looking at our list and saying, we need a book about a trans child. So there's this new publishing phenomenon which is producing books about trans children and gender identity workbooks. So we're going to move, and what they do, those books, it seems to me, is that they have a kind of central contradiction in them. They all say that they're about listening to the child. But of course what they do is to provide the child with a vocabulary. They are ventriloquizing the child. The child is given the terms, and then they listen to the child when the child is speaking what the adult wants the child to say, or expects the child to say. So it's the imposition of adult categories on the child's experience. You know, there are those little boys who wear pink tutus, they exist, but it's what you do with it, what the adult world does with it. So here is an example of a book for 7+. Oh, you see, we can have the next slide. This fits with my point. This is the back cover of that 2019 book. It says, with child-friendly language and vibrant art, it feels good to be yourself, provides young readers and parents alike with the vocabulary to discuss this important topic with sensitivity. So the terms come from this particular vocabulary. And one of the things they do is actually a very, very simple technique. They simply repeat the word gender to sort of, I mean, I think it's because the whole culture is so dead to the word gender, they can't even hear that they're repeating it. The word gender just comes again and again and again. And I used the sort of an online search tool to see how many times the word gender was repeated in various books. It's just endless. So in a book for 7+, the 7-year-old picking up the gender identity workbook for kids, I don't have a slide for this, encounters section 1, understanding gender. Gender can be challenging to wrap your head around because many of us don't have all the information about what gender really is or isn't. I'm sorry, I don't like the laughter. Or we have information which isn't completely correct. You remember we were going to listen to the child? I don't think so, no. Activity 1 teaches a 7-year-old to distinguish between assigned sex, gender expression, and gender. This book pays, I'm really repeating myself here, this book pays lip service to the idea that the child knows best, while at the same time imposing a gender catechism to be learned by rote. Gender is your deep down feeling that you're a boy, a girl, neither, both, or something else. That's right. Not just a boy or a girl. Some people know themselves to be both boy and girl. These are all capitalised, they're sort of in a bonkers way. Or neither boy nor girl, or something else altogether. There are so many genders, and the expert on your gender is capital letters, exclamation mark. Yes! Well done! Well done! Okay. Capitalisation and exclamation marks reveal the authoritarian tone, deployed paradoxically to insist that the child is the expert. And the section ends with a revision exercise with prescribed answers. So here's your test. It says for you to do. These are really important ideas, so let's check that we are on the same page. 1. How do people assign a baby's sex? Very good. Answer 1, by looking at the baby's body. Remember, this assigned sex is not always the same as a person's gender. So I think half a point there. Number 2, what do we call the way a person expresses their gender? It's a very difficult one, this.
Gender expression?
Fantastic! Wonderful! Okay, and number 3, who is the absolute best person to know and declare your gender? Oh, you're wonderful. And I mean, you know, we've got Stephanie as a qualified gender expert. And we are all, we have the level of understanding of a 7-year-old, so that's fantastic. For teens, we have, can I tell you about gender diversity? And again, I don't have a slide for this one. But it's the same kind of crude didacticism characterises Can I Tell You About Gender Diversity, a guide for friends, family and professionals by C.J. Atkinson. This book is part of the Educate and Celebrate pack that schools are meant to take to help their kids. This tells the story of Kit, a 12-year-old girl, quote, undergoing medical transition, according to the blurb. Kit explains how she realised that she was not a girl but a boy. I wonder how she did. No, I won't go on with this. All right. When I was born, this is Kit, 12. When I was born, the doctors told my mum and dad that they had a baby girl. And so for the first few years of my life, that's how my parents raised me. You know, you raise baby girls very differently from baby boys, of course. This is called being assigned female at birth. I wasn't ever very happy that way. I didn't like playing with dolls or wearing dresses and hated having long hair. And I think what we discover is just the mind-numbingly repetitive nature of gender ideology. There's very little in it, and it's always the same terms. Poor Kit appears to live in a 1960s time warp. She wants to cut her hair because she believes that short hair is what makes you a boy. She also feels she was born in the wrong body, so 12-year-old Kit applies for a new passport, does all the forms, I think, and goes on hormone blockers which, quote, stop my body developing in ways that make me unhappy. She tells us when she's 18, she'll be able to start on hormone replacement therapy, which means that I'll start to develop facial hair and my body will go through boy puberty. Obviously that's a lie, because her body won't go through boy puberty. And I'll come back to that later, but that's one of the things that this came from the chapter that I wrote with Stephanie. It's really Stephanie's point. But that was a point which was taken up in a Telegraph article based on this chapter. And it gave a sort of wonderful headline about, academic warns about the dangers of trans kids' books. But I think actually it is dangerous. I think it really is dangerous, and I don't think that was sort of alarmist. One thing that struck me about this book is that it pretends to be the voice of a 12-year-old child. But of course the author is, I think, a 28-year-old non-binary, adult. So that once again we've got that thing which is in a sense obviously central to all children's books, that they're written by adults. But these, in a particularly flagrant way, are just crudely didactic. They're as crudely didactic as the worst of kind of 19th century or 18th century bad children's literature. So I now want to talk, this is my last example, but I now want to talk about, in a sense I think, a much more interesting, perhaps we can go on now, can't remember what comes next. Okay, yes, it's not a very good slide, but I think it's a much more interesting question. I want to talk now about a book I didn't talk about in the book, and this is Julian Is A Mermaid. Yeah, and my audience has already got the point I'm about to make. Because this is a really lovely book. It's from the sort of very classy Walker books. It's won lots of prizes. It is beautiful. This has been greeted as, if you look on the back, it's a celebratory and groundbreaking book, a book that will leave the reader filled with joy, that made Neil Gaiman tear up, and Anthony Brown called astonishingly beautiful. Perhaps we have the next. Oh yes. Oh no, we won't have the next slide. Julian. Yes, we will have the next slide. Okay, so there it is, and I think it's a lovely book. And the next slide too. And the next slide. Okay. Julian Is A Mermaid tells the story of, quote, a boy named Julian, who loves swimming and loves mermaids. Next slide. Travelling on the subway with his nana, he sees 3 women dressed as mermaids. There they are. When he gets home, he improvises a mermaid costume. I don't have that, so I don't think it went to... There are the 3 women on the tube, and next one. And here is Julian imagining. He's reading, and here his imagination takes off. On we go. And he's imagining swimming. He's lost his clothes. On. Here he is, it's a kind of freedom, he can move anywhere in the water. Yes. He's up with all the squids and the skate. And here is his granny and her friends at the swimming costume. All right, at the swimming pool. All right, well, we'll go on. It's a story about a boy whose desire to dress up is cherished by his nana. Nowhere does Julian say he is trans or a girl or that he wants to transition when he grows up. When he gets home, he improvises a mermaid costume with ferns and flowers for a headdress and a curtain for a skirt or tail. So my question to myself is Julian like Arthur, the kid who loves dresses and who may turn out to be gay, or may not? Or is he Billy, the trans kid who is already destined, aged 4, for puberty blockers? And really, I think what I'm saying with this example is that what you make of a text depends on the reader and the culture that it's read by. So if you read the review on something called Common Sense Media, you discover that Julian Is A Mermaid by Jessica Love is a story about a boy who wants to be a mermaid that will resonate with all kids who have secret dreams. Julian shares his dream and identity with his abuela, but when he first tries dressing up as a mermaid, he does it when he's alone. Author-illustrator Love depicts a vibrant community where everyone's brown-skinned. This review says nothing about gender identity or trans, but emphasises culture and community, imagination and fantasy. It reads Julian, I think, as Arthur, the 90s child. But if you read Pink News, and that was my earlier slide, but we won't go back to it, you discover that Julian Is A Mermaid is a trans kid's book. Quote, a children's picture book about a trans mermaid called Julian has won the prestigious Klaus Fugger Prize. And you can see there how the cultural obsession with the figure of the trans child makes that journalist unable to read the book. He simply can't see what's in front of him. According to The Guardian, the win for Jessica Love's book is a rebuke to bigotry. Actually, according to The Guardian, it's a rebuke to me. Bigot unmasked. Love's win falls in a week when an academic has claimed that children are being put at risk by transgender books in UK primary schools. So that's a reference to the Telegraph story about Can I Tell You About Gender Diversity? So that made me think about whether our criticism of books like Wedding Pessaby, Who Are You, really does constitute what it is frequently described as a moral panic. In many ways, I think that Julian Is A Mermaid is just fine, a lovely book I would be happy to celebrate. Except that is that meanings are created by culture, not by individuals, and we live in a culture obsessed by the trans kid. In the current climate, it's hard for Julian to remain free of the categories that Pink News and The Guardian want to impose on him. And it gets a bit more complicated than that, because The Guardian also published an interview with Jessica Love, the author, in which Jessica Love reveals that she wrote the book with a very adult agenda. Jessica Love chose the figure of the mermaid after visiting chat rooms for parents of trans kids. She says, I was reading all these parenting blogs, and this theme of mermaids is a thread that runs through so many of these different kids' experiences. There's something about mermaids. Who knows if that's because they're magical creatures who can live between two realities, or because they don't have any genitals, or because they're fucking great. You know, quite a level of analysis there. I think there's something a bit worrying about the celebration of creatures that don't have any genitals. As Love explains, the mythical creatures have become symbolic to transgender people and their allies. They are depicted as nothing below their waist but a tail. Such is the affinity between the two that the British trans children's charity Mermaids derives its name from the beings. Now, critics who write about children's literature often talk about a dual address, that a book will talk simultaneously to an adult reader and a child reader, and adults will take different things from a book than a child will. I want to argue that the success of Julian Is A Mermaid, I mean, it is a beautiful book, but the way that adults read it, the fact that it's won the Stonewall Award, has been nominated for the Waterstones Award, and now the Klaus Fugger Award for illustrated books, owes something to a very adult reading of the story, where a child might just see the scene in which Julian turns a curtain into a mermaid costume as imaginative play. An informed adult might also see in the curtain scene episode a reference to, anyone know what? No? Okay. Julius Serrano's gender revelation in Whipping Girl. The moment when Serrano, quote, found myself inexplicably compelled to remove a set of white lacy curtains from the window and wrap them around my body like a dress. And that's how Serrano knew that Serrano was a woman. So when I talk about childhood innocence, I'm using it in a kind of Blakean sense of the ability to protect the freedom of the child to view the world outside adult categories. I'm not talking about prudishness or sex. In fact, I think the trans children's books are prudish. I'm talking about the freedom to escape an adult taxonomy, where a child might assume that the women dressed as mermaids are simply women dressed as mermaids. The adult is meant to realise that the mermaids in the story are transvestite men. There is nothing in the drawing style, I think, that would suggest this to a reader. But Jessica Love's initial plan was to tell the story of a child who loves drag queens. The annual Coney Island Mermaid Parade, which he then hit on, you know, I need mermaids because of Mermaids Charity. Oh, there's an actual mermaid parade, is not a drag event, but an art parade founded in 1983, which brings mythology to life for local residents who live on streets named Mermaid and Neptune. It creates self-esteem in a district that is often disregarded as entertainment, and it lets artistic New Yorkers find self-expression in public. And I suppose one of the things I'm saying is just the extraordinary kind of reduction in complexity that's come over culture. If you can only ever see one thing, you can only see gender categories. You know, how about imagination? How about freedom? How about something actually more positive? But in the current climate, love story is categorised within adult readings. So the two books, Can I Tell You About Gender Diversity and the visually beautiful book that won a prize, are entirely different. One is a tract which misrepresents current knowledge about medical intervention for children with gender dysphoria, and to use such a book in schools is clearly dangerous. But the concerns we expressed are not, I think, a moral panic. A gender non-conforming girl such as Kit is overwhelmingly likely to grow up to be a lesbian if she avoids medical intervention, which will distort her sexuality and hinder her fertility. So I think this is a story, my story is a story about the closing down of culture and the limitation of meaning.
Thank you very much.
You to write a story for children who are gender non-conforming but not trans.
Ah, well, I'm not going to write that book, but that is the book that we need.
Yes.
We do, absolutely. So I think we have a very great need for a book which talks about about the relationship of mind and body and doesn't do this weird dualist thing of saying bodies don't matter.
I think there's a lot of there's a lot of drama out there that is very transpositive, isn't there? And there's a lot of drama that is very transpositive. I don't watch telly, but CBBS, I think, and the Radio 4 dramas that run that are affirming trans ideology. And there is this missing role for drama and fiction and a place for children's stories.
I mean, absolutely. And just, I think, you know, one of the books Tony Rosso, that book about the child who wants a cat, and you know,
I want to be a cat.
I want to be a cat.
She wants to be a dog at the end of it. She dresses as a cat.
Absolutely. She wants to be a dog, wants to be a dog, wants to be a dog.
Yeah.
She gets a cat, and then she wants a dog. That's right. But I
So
mean,
that's-
that
it's
seems to be
just
such a
dog.
rich story about kind of desire, basically, and about how, you know, when we get what we want something else. So the kind of complexity of that. But I was going to say something else. I've forgotten now. No, it's fine. On we go.
Someone.
I don't know how big the median actually is. She's from Sweden, just like us. And her stories about people long-suffering and
Yes.
they're all, I mean, they're both the head characters, they're girls, and their gender is non-conforming. And the boys aside of them are a bit troubled and lame in a way. The books are already there.
Absolutely, exactly. I mean, you know, it sounds rather pathetic, doesn't say sort of just read older books, you know. But absolutely, of course, you know, there's sort of everything's there.
Spy is another great example.
Yeah.
Harriet the Spy is apparently another great example.
Absolutely. We could go on and on, couldn't we? And obviously, you know, I was seeking out ridiculous books, but that's why I thought it was more interesting to talk about actually a lovely book as well.
Just to say that we are publishing a beautiful, absolutely fantastic, much better than that, book called My Body Is Me. I'm not going to tell you anything more about it, but it's the most beautiful children's book I've ever seen for the early years. It's going to be out in early December. We are on track. So just save that bit of money for your stocking fillers, because you're all Transgender Trend. Transgender Trend publishers.
Yes, I actually knew that, but I didn't know if I was allowed to say. Thank you, Stephanie. It's so exciting.
You won't tell anyone.
No. Okay.